What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm back here once again for the most comprehensive NBA player prop preview. I do this every single day, and in these videos, I share my screen. I take you through all the key players for every single game. We go through their matchup. We talk about what's good. We talk about what isn't. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the best bets possible. Now, a lot of you guys have been cashing. I'm reading all the comments. A lot of guys shared a lot of their players. So I encourage you, share your picks. Let's give each other some feedback so that we can all eat. Yesterday, I didn't have the best day. I finished 2 units under. I only had 3 2-unit players. I normally have a lot more. I tried to be very selective with it, and it didn't work in my favor. I went 1 and 2. A lot of the leans that I did have absolutely cashed. I'm talking about Kyle Kuzma, Bron James. I don't even want to talk about it because I'm going to get upset. But a lot of the players I was leaning on, I didn't bet. They all cashed. The 3 that I landed on, which you could say my best bets, didn't pay off for me anyway. So I'm throwing that strategy out the window. What I'm going to do is if I find something I like, I'm just going to bet on it. If I finish with 5, 10, 15 bets, so be it. We'll leave it up to the gambling gods because it's been working for me so far. Almost 60 units in the profit. Now let's get into today's video. Let's go. So we're kicking things off with the Brooklyn Nets versus the Detroit Pistons. Only Day'Ron Sharpe is a game time decision in this one for the Brooklyn Nets. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to avoid the players that nobody's going to be betting on anyway. But let's start things off with Isaiah Stewart. I did bet on him more recently, and he did cash because he's been hitting his points line at a very consistent rate. Check this out. His line's at 10.5. He's covered in 9 out of his last 10 games. He does have a somewhat difficult matchup against the Brooklyn Nets, though. Against Brooklyn, he's covered in 2 out of his last 4. Now, I do like this form, but the matchup is a difficult one. It's Nick Claxton, so I won't be playing this one. But if you choose to, go ahead, my man. If you want to look at his 3-point prop, the line's at 1.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10 and only 1 of his last 4 against Brooklyn. And looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 6.5. He's covered in 2 of his last 4 against Brooklyn. The matchup is difficult, and he's covered in 5 of his last 10. So Isaiah Stewart, his points, probably the only one worth considering. Jumping into Jaden Ivey, now his points prop here is 16.5. Looking at the over, it's minus 104. In terms of the matchup, it's not an easy one. He's covered this line in 2 of his last 10, but against the Brooklyn Nets, he's covered in 3 out of his last 5. Moving into his assist prop, that line's at 3.5. He does have a difficult matchup. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games, but he's done it well against Brooklyn. Check this out. 4 out of his last 5 games against the Brooklyn Nets, Jaden Ivey has gone above his assist line. If you're getting that at plus money, that sounds interesting. Jump all over it. Into Asar Thompson. Firstly, let me flick this to the over. We'll look at the unders anyway, but this makes it easier for me to sort. Asar Thompson, his points prop, 11.5 points. In this game against the Nets, he's got a great matchup. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, but against the Nets, he's gone under in both games. Plus 100 odds for Asar Thompson, you still might like that. Looking at his rebounds, the line's at 6.5. Again, a great matchup, but he went under in both times against the Nets, and he's covered in 5 out of his last 10. So if you're a big believer in matchups, get all over Asar Thompson. If you're looking at recent form, I'm a little bit hesitant, but sometimes recent form don't mean shit. Like I bet on players who have excellent form, who have excellent matchup, and I still only win half the time anyway. So trust your gut on this one, but do your research first. Let's have a look at Jalen Duren. His points props at 12.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup as well. These are 4s and 5s for the Brooklyn Nets. They make it difficult. Dorian Finney-Smith, Nick Claxton, making life hell down there. He's covered 5 of his last 10 and 2 out of his last 4 against the Brooklyn Nets. Looking at his rebound prop, that line's at 10.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10 games and 2 of his last 4 against Brooklyn. So Jalen Duren, double-double. If I was going to play Jalen Duren anything, I might just take the 10 and 10. What I'm thinking. This one here is Cade Cunningham. Now, Cade, his points props at 21.5. He's got a good matchup against Brooklyn. They don't defend point guards very well. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. And check this out. Last 2 games against the Nets, 22 and 41 points. So I don't mind that. Looking at his assist prop, that line's at 7.5. That's a little bit too high for my liking. 6 out of his last 10. He's got a difficult matchup. And against the Brooklyn Nets, he's gone under in 2 straight games. So what I'm thinking here, ready for Cade Cunningham, I'll filter things around whilst I'm talking, but what I'm thinking is he goes over his points prop and he goes under his assist prop. If I was looking at a single bet, I'll take the over 21.5. Quickly just having a look at his rebound prop. Oh, 4.5. That's pretty high. 6 out of his last 10, though. And he's covered in 1 of his last 2 against Brooklyn. So the rebound side of things, a little bit difficult to call, but I do like his over in points and he's under in his assists. I might not give a shit about what I think, and you're just here to see the numbers, and I'm showing them to you. So, Cade Cunningham, I don't mind that. I'm writing that. All right, jumping into these Brooklyn Nets. Now, Dennis Schroeder, he's been playing quite well as of late. His points prop is 15.5. He's got a great matchup against Detroit. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games. Hasn't played against the Detroit Pistons since joining the Brooklyn Nets. So I've got a small sample size of form here, but I do like the over. I know he's only hit in 3 of his last 10, but I like it. Looking at his assist prop, 6.5. The matchup isn't as easy, but he's covered this in 4 straight games. Checking to see how many games for Brooklyn he has played. He's played quite a few, but his last 4, he's really started to see a lift and an increase into his minutes. So for Dennis Schroeder, if I was going to play him, I'd look at his points plus assists, over 22.5. Obviously, he's got the excellent matchup in terms of scoring the ball. So over in his points is probably my favorite one, but he's clearly got the potential to do both. So Dennis Schroeder, I don't mind that one. Having a look at Mikal Bridges in this game. Great matchup against the Pistons, but he's only covered in 2 of his last 10. Very difficult player to bet on. But against the Pistons, he's covered in 2 out of his last 3. If you're interested in his 3-point prop, you're looking at 2.5. He's covered that in 4 of his last 10, but he hasn't covered that against the Brooklyn Nets. Against the Detroit Pistons. His assist prop, though, that's at 3.5. Covered in 5 of his last 10. Has a good matchup, and he's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against the Pistons. Outside of that, let's have a look at Nick Claxton, and then we'll jump into the next game. His points line is at 13.5. The Pistons as a team give up the 4th most points overall and the 8th most points to centers. He's gone over his points line in 2 consecutive games now. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 out of his last 5, but he has gone under in 2 straight. Looking at his rebound prop, 10.5. He's covered in only 1 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is not hard, but it's not an easy one either. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 out of his last 5. So, look, I'm not feeling an under or an over there for Nick Claxton. Within this game, I'd say Dennis Schroeder and Cade Cunningham are the ones probably most likely to cover. Isaiah Stewart, he could, but I think the matchup's quite difficult for him. The next one we're looking at is the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Indiana Pacers. In terms of lineups, Karl-Anthony Towns is out for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Benedict Mathurin is out for the Indiana Pacers. So we'll jump through the Timberwolves first, starting with Mike Conley. Now, Mike Conley, his points line is at 12.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. His matchup isn't too bad against the Pacers. He only scored 5 points the last game against the Pacers. But his assist prop, 5 out of his last 10, he's covered 5.5. The Pacers allow the fewest assists to point guards on the season. Now, Conley had 9 assists the last time these guys played. But check this out. I'll show you his assists without Karl-Anthony Towns. And you can see he's inconsistent as hell, right? So I was originally leaning to the under. Obviously, his lines have moved up with no Karl-Anthony Towns. But when I broke things down, it didn't feel very safe to me. But I assure you, for all of those guys looking for unders, I am going to be betting on a few. I don't give a shit anymore. We're going to do it. I'm letting loose here. I'm just running off vibe. So I'm going to look at the data, look at the numbers. I'm going to see how it makes me feel on my inside, and then I'm going to bet it because I overanalyzed the stuff yesterday, and that didn't work in my favor, and I felt like an asshole all day watching my could-be plays hit, but I didn't because I overanalyzed all the numbers. So we're running with some vibe off the back of some data. We'll see how this one treats us. Looking at Anthony Edwards in this one, 29.5 points. You can see he's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. Has a pretty good matchup here against the Pacers, but he's only covered in 1 out of his last 3 against them. 37 points the last time they played. His assist prop is at 4.5. Tough matchup against the Pacers, covered in 5 of his last 10 and only 1 of his last 3 against them. Looking at his 3-point prop, lines at 2.5, 5 out of his last 10. Tough matchup, but he had 7 3-pointers against these guys last time they played. And lastly, looking at his rebound prop, 5.5's the line. He's covered in 2 of his last 3 against the Pacers and only 4 of his last 10 in general. So, yeah, I'm not really feeling that for Anthony Edwards. But let's have a look at Rudy Gobert. His points line's at 16.5. It's quite high, but obviously no cat, more opportunities for Rudy. He's covered this in 2 out of his last 10. The Pacers do allow the 7th fewest points to centers in the season. Head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 1 out of his last 3 against Indiana. Rebound-wise, his line is at 15.5. And check that out. 5 out of his last 10. Well, 5 out of his last 6, really. Tough matchup here against the Pacers. They allow the 5th fewest points rebounds to centers. And in head-to-head matchups, he's at 16, 21, but then 7 earlier this season. So Look, I think he's not going to have much competition to get rebounds. The risk is if Miles Turner's always hanging around the outside, that might make it difficult for Rudy. Having a look at these paces, let's have a look at Tyrese Halliburton. Check out his points, 3-pointers, and assists. So his points prop, 18.5. Difficult matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves in this one. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, scored 26 points the last time these guys met. Jumping into his assist prop, that's at 10.5. It's actually quite low compared to where it usually sits on the season. A difficult matchup. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games, and he's covered it both times against the Timberwolves. Check that out. 14 and 15 assists the last 2 games against Minnesota. So there must be something happening in the water there. Tyrese Halliburton has probably figured something out, or maybe it's all the ball movement makes it difficult. I'm not too sure, but I don't mind that. The overs for Halliburton's assists. Looking at his 3-point prop, 6 out of his last 10 games, he's covered it. The Timberwolves allow the fewest 3-pointers made to point guards on the season. He did have 5 3-pointers the last time they played. So, yeah, probably Tyrese Halliburton assists. I don't mind that so far. Jumping into Miles Turner, his points prop, 16.5. 4 out of his last 10 games. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against the Timberwolves, but only scored 12 points when they last met. His 3-point prop is 1.5, and it's plus money in this one. The Timberwolves actually give up 3-pointers to centers if you look at this. So they give up the 9th most 3-pointers. If you go through each position, the Timberwolves give up the 2nd fewest 3-pointers overall, full stop. But where they are weak is defending centers. They give up quite a high number of 3-pointers to centers on the season. Miles Turner up against the Timberwolves, 7, 4, and then just 1 in their most recent matchup. In that game, he only played 21 minutes. Timberwolves did win by 19 points. Oh, it's 18 points, sorry. Looking at his attempts, he only attempted 2 3-pointers in that game. So reduced minutes, only 2 attempts. If we check out his last 5 games, you probably get a better representation here. He's averaging 4 attempts per game, 5 against Dallas, 9 against the Spurs, but only 1 and 2 against the Pels, and then 3 against Toronto. So he's shooting them at 26%, so which isn't a great field goal percentage, but yeah, plus money. I could be tempted, but yeah, at the same time, could be tempted, but I don't want to do it. So I looked at the numbers, and my gut says no. Pascal Siakam, 20.5 is his points line. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. The Timberwolves give up the 9th fewest points to power forwards on the season. So I've said this in many videos before, but I'm not overly keen on betting on Pascal at this point, especially since joining the Pacers. He's very inconsistent. His assist prop is at 3.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. The Wolves get the least assist to power forwards. And looking at his rebound prop has been looking quite good these days. Check that out. Covering in 5 of his last 6 games. He does have a somewhat difficult matchup here against the Minnesota Timberwolves, but Kyle Anderson's playing the 4 in this one. He's not a spot-up shooter. Karl Anthony Towns is a much better shooter. That should leave Pascal Siakam in good position to get some rebounds. Turner's definitely going to have his hands full with Rudy Gobert. So I think Pascal's the guy that's got to step up here. So I don't mind Pascal Siakam to get some boards. All right. So we're taking a look at the Miami Heat versus the Dallas Mavericks. So for Dallas, Luka Doncic, Maxi Kleber, game time decisions. For Miami, Tyler Hero and Kevin Love are out of this game. So we'll jump through these Miami Heat plays first. We'll start with Jimmy Butler. I've been betting on Jimmy Butler for quite some time now. Didn't start betting on until after the All-Star break, and he's been delivering quite well. Looking at his points prop, though, his line in this one is 22.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. The matchup isn't the easiest one, and he's covered in 1 of his last 2 against Dallas. His assist prop, 5.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games. Has a great matchup here against Dallas. Had 12 assists the last time these guys played. Dallas defensively, they've only gotten worse after the All-Star break, so I don't mind that for Jimmy Butler. Looking at his rebound prop, the line's at 5.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10, and he's got a good matchup here against Dallas, but hasn't rebounded well against them in his last 2. So in terms of good matchup, his rebounds and assists, they both are great. I'm personally most likely going to play Jimmy's assists. I just think this pace is going to be high. Dallas defensively isn't great. Jimmy should get some points, but I'm watching his games. He does tend to post up, wait for a double, get some cutters, find some shooters. I do feel quite confident in his assist prop. Having a look at Bam Adebayo. Now, you'd think he has the easy matchup against Dallas, but the numbers tell us differently. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. Line's at 19.5. Against Dallas, and he scored 18 points the last time they played. So just a bit under this line. And looking at his rebound prop, Bam Adebayo, lines at 10.5. The matchup isn't difficult, but it's not easy either. He's gone 6 straight games, covering in 3 of his last 10. Did have 11 rebounds the last time they played Dallas. Have a look at Duncan Robinson. So he's in the starting lineup now. His points prop, 14.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Does have a good matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. In head-to-head matchups, scored 0 points the last time these guys played. He only played 2 minutes. Looking straight to his 3-point prop, what do we see? His line's at 3.5. He's got a great matchup. The Mavs allow the second most 3-pointers made to shooting guards on the season. He's made 4 3-pointers in 5 out of his last 10 games. Obviously didn't make any against Dallas last time. So he's playing a lot of minutes too. Check that out. 32 minutes. He's attempting 7.6 3-pointers per game, and he's shooting them at a 41% clip. The games where he has gone under, what did we see? 2 for 9 against Utah, 2 for 6 against Denver, 0 for 6 against the Kings, and 1 of 6 against the Spurs. So the volume is definitely there. I think this correlates well with Jimmy Butler. And the fact that we're getting it for plus money, plus 122, has got my interest. I might play that, but I'll research that a little bit later on. Scary Terry. I haven't checked his numbers out for time. Now, his point prop, 16.5, 5 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup against Dallas here. Looking at his assist prop, lines at 5.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. And looking at his rebound prop, 3.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. Looking at his 3-pointers, you can get him at over 2.5, and you get that at plus money. Or you can take him at 1.5, but then the value is not that great, minus 165. Either way, quite inconsistent, difficult matchup here against Dallas. I think the wings, Duncan Robinson gets some buckets. Jimmy's obviously going to get some too, but I don't mind Duncan Robinson in this one. Let's have a look at Luka Doncic. Triple-double machine. His points prop, 33.5. He's covered in 3 straight, 5 out of his last 10. Tough matchup here against the Miami Heat, but Luka's covered this in his last 2 games against them, scoring 34 and 42 points. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 10.5, 6 out of his last 10, and he's gone under his last 2 games against Miami. His rebound prop, 9.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 4 consecutive games now, covered in both games against the Miami Heat. And his 3-point prop, it's only 3.5 in this one, so I don't mind this. Covering in 6 out of his last 10 games, had 5 in one game, and then 2 in the following game against Miami. In those games, he's averaging at least 7 attempts. If we look at his last 5 games, though, Luka averaging 10.2 3-pointers made per game. He's shooting them at 34%. So, yeah, I think at 3.5, and you get that for even money, I think the odds are honestly spot on. They're right where they need to be. But for Luka to make 4, I think out of all of Luka props, I probably wouldn't mind that one. The Miami Heat aren't going to make it easy for him in the paint. They do give up some 3-pointers, so I might add that to my short list. Luka to get some 3-pointers, and I'll research it a little bit later. Kyrie Irving is up next. His points prop is at 25.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games. He does have an easier scoring matchup than Luka Doncic has. And head-to-head matchups, he scored 23 points the last time these guys played. Jumping into his assists, the line's at 3.5. He's covered in 4 out of his 10 games. Rebound-wise, line's also at 4.5, covering in 8 out of his last 10. And the matchup is a pretty good one here, so I don't mind this one. Kyrie rebounds. And 3-point prop, you're looking at over 2.5 or 3 for a push. The matchup is a good one. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, but only made 1 3-pointer the last time he played them. He's averaging 7.7 attempts, and he's shooting 41% from the field. So Kyrie 3-pointers, probably not too bad either. I'm not going to be able to get a push, so I have to take him to get to make 3, which is over 2.5, which is minus 170, or over 3.5, which is plus 155. So yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence about that one, but Kyrie and Luka should make it rain in this one. Looking at the other players, probably PJ Washington, his points prop, the only one worth considering, I'd say. He's covered in 4 straight games now. The line's at 12.5. Matchup, it's not an easy one, but it's not a difficult one either. If you want to have a look at his 3-point props, because Luke has been dotting him the whole time, his line's at 1.5. It's minus 160, but he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He's playing a lot of minutes, and he's averaging 5.8 attempts. But check this out in his last 4 games. 10, 9, 7, and 8 attempts there. So the volume is there. He's unfortunately only shooting them about 27%. So What you could do is we're seeing Dallas at home here. You can filter things by just his home games to see does his percentage get better there, and it actually gets worse. So he's shooting 23% in his last 10 home games. So look, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go over, but at these odds, I don't think that's worth taking. He is going to get a lot of opportunities though. So if he gets 5 3-pointers, be sure to remind me. Let me know in the comments. All right, so it's laying into the next one. It's the Toronto Raptors versus the Phoenix Suns. We've got Agbaji's a game time decision. Obviously, Barnes, Pirtle, Bruce Brown, Devin Booker, they're all out of this game. So the big names to really look through here is Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Grayson Allen's done all right, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Royce. Actually, the whole starting five for Phoenix we can go through. So, all right, let's take a look at RJ Barrett. Now, his point prop is 21.5 in this game. Difficult matchup here against the New York Knicks. What am I talking about? Against the Phoenix Suns. He was quite disappointing in the last showing without Scotty Barnes, only 15 against the Pels, but everybody was against it for the Raptors. Suns do allow some points to power forwards. We know that Barrett, he's lining up at 4, but he really plays a 3. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. Looking at his assist prop, that line's at 4.5, covering in 5 out of his last 10. His 3-point prop is at 1.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 as well, but 5 out of his last 6 really. Had a shit show against the Pelicans. Looking at his attempts, he was just 0 for 2. So I just wonder, will he be able to get these open 3-pointers that he normally takes without Scotty Barnes in the lineup? Looking at his rebound prop, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games. Lines at 6.5. Far out, I almost threw up in my mouth. But yeah, RJ Barrett, maybe you want to throw up, so I'm not betting on him. Emmanuel Quickley, I think his points and assists, the only ones worth looking at here, but we'll check his 3-pointers out too. Matchup against the Suns, they allow some points to point guards. His line's at 19.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. His assist prop, 7.5. It's plus money. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10. 3 out of his last 4, really. Still managed to get 7 assists against the Toronto Raptors, and they lost by 40-something points. So Emmanuel Quickley assists, that might be something that I can get around. 3-point prop is at 2.5 minus 166. He's covered in 6 of his last 7 games, and he's got a great matchup here against the Phoenix Suns. So I don't mind that for IQ. Let me write that down. IQ, 3-pointers made, and assists. Who else is there? Gary Trent Jr. I've had enough of you, my friend. I don't like you. Kelly Olynyk. Now, Kelly Olynyk recently promoted to the starting lineup. So over his last 10, you're going to see a lot of rubbish. But we'll look at his last 5. 2 out of his last 5 games, he's covered his points proper 13.5. Now, I don't like that. He still managed to score 15 points against the Raptors in a blowout, but he's got a difficult matchup in this one. His assist prop is 5.5. It's plus money. He got 7 assists in that blowout against the Raptors. He does have a good matchup here against the Suns. I don't mind the assist, if I'm being honest with you. Looking at his rebound prop, though, line is at 7.5. He's covered in 1 of his last 5 games. So check this out. 2 out of his last 20 games, which is pretty crazy. 1 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 20. Up against Yusuf Nurkic, absolute beast inside. I think Kelly Olynyk's going to have a hard time. So this is one of the unders that I know I was going to play. Kelly Olynyk, under 7.5 rebounds. It's gone under 18 of his last 20 games. A lot of these games he was playing off the bench. In his new role, he's playing about 6 to 7 extra minutes, so 28 minutes a night. And in those games, he's covered in 1 out of his last 3. But he's got a difficult matchup here. And I'm gladly taking the under for Kelly Olynyk rebounds. Looking at the Phoenix Suns, Bradley Beal, his points prop 20.5. Playing point guard these days. He's got a difficult matchup here against the Raptors when it comes to scoring the ball. When it comes to passing the ball with his assists, though, he's got a great matchup here. The Raps give up a ton of them. Mine's at 5.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. If we want to look at his last 10 games without Devin Booker, we can see that Bradley Beal has covered in 5 of his last 10. So that's not overly impressive. But I don't mind this. Bradley Beal to go over his assist prop. He is 3-point prop, 1.5. He doesn't shoot these very well, and he has a difficult matchup. So I don't like his points. I don't like his 3-pointers made prop. But the assist prop might be something that I can muck around with, especially at these odds. Over in assists, take note of that. Who else do we have? Grayson Allen, points props 14.5, scored 28 points in that last game. The matchup with the Raptors is a good one. Looking at his 3-point prop, the line's at 3.5. It's plus money. He's only covered in 2 of his last 10, but when he does go off, does he go off? Checking his games out without D-Book, still only covered in 3 out of his last 10, so that's not overly impressive. And looking at Yusuf Nurkic, his points prop 14.5 points, 3 out of his last 10 games. The matchup against the Raptors, not good, but not bad either. Nurkic scored 19 points in his last game against Toronto. Looking at his assist prop, 4.5, seemed quite high, but he's hitting 4 of his last 10. He's had 6 assists the last time he played them. And looking into his rebound prop, where he's been an absolute beast. See here, 31 rebounds against OKC. The matchup here against the Raptors is not as easy, but he's covered in 2 out of his last 10. He's got a very high line in this one. Did have 14 rebounds the last time he played the Toronto Raptors, though, if that means anything. A little bit too high for me to take. Looking at Kevin Durant, his points prop here is 29.5. The Raptors, not the most difficult matchup, but again, they're missing Scotty Barnes now. I don't think there's anyone in their starting lineup who can defend Kevin Durant. He's covered this in 2 out of his last 10 games. Scored 30 points against the Raptors the last time they played. Kevin Durant, without D-Book, has covered this line in 6 out of his last 10 games. So, yeah, definitely lean to the over in this one. His assists, he's covered in 5 of his last 10 games. Without Devin Booker, covered in 4 out of his last 10. So that actually doesn't even get better. His rebound prop, 7.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Without Devin Booker, Durant, 5 of his last 10. So his lines are all quite high, to be honest. His points, rebounds, and assists, they're all quite high. His 3-point props at 2.5, and that's high for me. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 20 games. So don't like the 3-point prop there for Kevin Durant, but at 29.5 for his points prop, that might be something that we can dance with. But yeah, I just got this feeling in my gut that I don't like it. 29.5 points is a lot of points. Royce O'Neal. Now, this guy is part of the reason why Kevin Durant's rebounds and assists have started to drop off. So his points props at 11.5, but ain't nobody screwing with that. He does have a good matchup, don't get me wrong, but he's covered in 2 out of his last 10. He plays a lot of minutes, attempts almost 9 shots a game on average. So jumping into his assist prop, though, this is where things can get a little bit interesting. So his line's at 3.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Checking out his games without Book, he's only covered in 2 of his last 10, but obviously his minutes are on the way up. His last 3 games are the ones I'm most interested in. His rebound props at 4.5. Has had some very big rebounding games. I'm covering in 6 out of his last 10. Maybe if you want to filter to his home games alone, that's 5 of his last 10 as well. So I think it requires a bit more further research. Royce O'Neal, like a budget Josh Hart, really can do it all. Points, rebounds, and assists. You just got to find the right matchup and the right reasons to pick him. Let's jump into the next one. So we're looking at the Boston Celtics versus the Denver Nuggets. That's going to be a great game. Part of the challenge with this one is Jaylen Brown. He's a game time decision in this one. He's probably feeling a little bit injured after fucking up one of my bets the other day. So let's have a look at Jaylen Brown anyway. I'm not going to bet on him, even if he does play, but in case anybody else wants to, let me give it to you. He's got a tough matchup. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against Denver. His assists, 2.5, covering in 8 of his last 10 games and 2 of his last 3 against Denver. His rebound prop, 5.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 against Denver. His 3-pointers made prop is 2 out of his 3 against Denver, and he's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. So his form's actually not too bad, but he does have a horrific matchup in this one. Quite difficult. Looking at the Denver Nuggets, start with Jamal Murray. His points prop 21.5. He's got a good matchup to score some more buckets in this one, covering in 5 of his last 10. Scored 35 points the last time he saw the Boston Celtics, and that was in January this year. So that's a great showing. That's a good sign for us. So I don't mind the over there for Jamal Murray. Looking at his assist prop, that line is at 6.5, covering in 5 of his last 10. He only had 5 assists the last time they played against Boston. And looking at his 3-pointers made prop, line's at 2.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. Does have a good matchup. Had 3 3-pointers made the last time these teams played. Who else have we got? Let's check out KCP's 3-pointers made prop. Let's check him out. In terms of the matchup, it's a difficult one. He's covered his points prop in 7 out of his last 10, only in 1 of 3 against them. His 3-pointers prop is 1.5. He's covered that in 6 of his last 10, 4 consecutive games. Somewhat difficult matchup, though, but he's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against Boston. Having a look at MPJ, Michael Porter Jr., his points prop is 16.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Matchup not easy, but not hard, but he's only covered in one of his last 3 against Boston. Looking at his 3-pointers made prop, that's at 2.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, has hit in 3 consecutive games. He's only hit in 1 in 3 games against the Celtics. His rebound prop is 6.5. He's covered that in 7 out of his last 10. He's got a pretty good matchup, though, in this one. So 7 of his last 10, but he's only covered in 1 of his last 3 against Boston. The last game they did play, he finished on 8 rebounds. So MPJ rebounds might be something that I can get around, just possibly. Let me put that down. MPJ rebounds. Let's have a look at Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon might pick up the Jason Tatum assignment. His points prop is 13.5. He's covered in 8 of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup here against the Celtics, but he has covered in 2 out of his last 3, but he only scored 2 points the last time these teams met. His rebound prop is 5.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And against the Boston Celtics, he's covered in 3 consecutive games. So he had 10 rebounds in that last matchup against the Boston Celtics. So, yeah, that's not a bad play either. And at 5.5, 1 rebound lower than MPJ might be something that you guys can get around. But I do think I like the MPJ one a little bit better. Nikola Jokic. So his points prop is at 25.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, he's given it to the Celtics, covering this line in 3 consecutive games. His 3-pointers made props at 1.5. It's plus money. He's hit in 3 of his last 10. He's got a pretty good matchup here. But against the Celtics, he's gone over in 3 consecutive games. Nikola Jokic, his points and his 3-point prop might be interesting. Jumping into his assist prop, that line's at 8.5. He's only covered in 4 of his last 10. Tough matchup here against the Celtics, but he has covered in 2 out of his last 3. And his rebound prop, 12.5. He's gone under in all 3 games against Boston, and he's covered in 5 of his last 10 games. So, yeah, I think Nikola Jokic, maybe his 3-point prop, maybe his points. So, I'll look into that later. So we're jumping in the Chicago Bulls versus the Golden State Warriors. No one notable as a game time decision in this one. So a lot of players to choose from. We'll start with these Chicago Bulls. Where's my man Kobe White? He had a pretty good game today. They are on a back-to-back. Points prop is 21.5. Has a good matchup here against the Golden State Warriors. He scored 37 his last matchup against the Kings. So looking at 3 of his last 10. Covered in 1 of his last 3 against the Golden State Warriors. His assist prop, 5.5, covering in 6 of his last 10. Another good matchup here against the Warriors. Had 7 assists against them last time. His 3-point prop is 3.5. He's covered that in 3 of his last 10. Had 5 against the Warriors last time. And his rebound prop, 5.5. Quite high. 4 out of his last 10 games. Went under in all 3 games against the Warriors. For Kobe White, points plus assists. That seems a little bit enticing. Covering in 4 of his last 10 games. But his last game against the Warriors, 25 points and 7 assists. He's got a great matchup for both of them. That could be a play. Ayo Dosunmu killed the assist prop in this game. His last game, actually. Points, 13.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. The matchup's not a difficult one, but it's not an easy one either. Has gone under in 3 straight games against the Warriors. Point is made. His line's still at 1.5. He's covered that at 9 of his last 10 games. And he's covered in his last 2 games against the Golden State Warriors. His assist prop is at 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. 1 of his last 3 against the Warriors. And his rebound prop, 4 out of his last 10 and 1 out of his last 3 against the Warriors. DeMar DeRozan, points and assists. I leaned on him once again. He covered, of course. So let's take a look at DeMar. So 8 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 21.5 points. Against the Warriors, he scored 39 points the last time these teams faced each other. His assist line, 4.5. He's covered that in 6 out of his last 10. He has covered in 2 straight against the Golden State Warriors. For DeRozan, I've been looking at points plus assists for him quite often. He's hit that in 8 of his last 10 games. Might be something that I look at again. DeMar DeRozan, PA. He's made a few 3-pointers, but look, line's at 0.5. For him to make 1, minus 119. The Warriors allow the 14th fewest 3-pointers made, about middle of the pack. DeRozan, he's averaging almost 3 attempts per game. So for him to make 1 at minus 119, I honestly don't hate that. That's not the worst play. He did make 2 3-pointers against them last time. Took 5 attempts, which is pretty good. So DeMar 3-pointers, if I can get a good price for that, definitely have a taste. Rebounds, 4.5. Yeah, his rebounds are all over the place. You don't want to bet that. Nikola Vucevic, let's check him out. Lost my bloody filters. Let me put these back on. Vucevic, his points prop is 19.5 in this game. Up against the Warriors, he's covered this 7 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 games against Golden State. His rebound prop, 11.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games and 1 of his last 3 against the Warriors. So I'm not really feeling Vucevic in this one. I do like DeRozan and Kobe White. But jumping into these Warriors, I want to talk about pods for a second because I think I already know a play that I'm going to bet on. I just want to double check it. It's not his points prop. Line's at 9.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Looking at his rebound prop, line's at 6.5. It's a bit too high for my liking, covering in 4 out of his last 10 with a difficult matchup. What I was thinking of betting on was his assist line. 3.5. Check that out. He's got a good matchup. He's covered in 8 of his last 10, and you can get this for pretty much plus money. So, yeah, definitely pods. I'm liking that one for sure. Pods assist. And also in his last matchup against the Bulls, he did finish on 4 assists as well. So, yeah, pods for assists. I don't mind. Let's have a look at the chef. Steph Curry. Difficult matchup here against the Bulls. They don't allow many points to point guards at all. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10, 1 of his last 3 against the Bulls. Assist-wise, lines at 4.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3. Looking at three-pointers, lines at 5.5, covering in 5 of his last 10, 1 of his last 3 against the Bulls. His rebound prop is 4.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, but 3 out of his last 4. And he's covered it in 3 consecutive games against the Chicago Bulls. So if you like the matchup there, you could take that one. Let's look at the cum bucket. His points prop, 16.5. Got a good matchup here against Chicago. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. Did score 24 points the last time he played the Chicago Bulls. That was a very high-scoring game. But Jonathan Kuminga, I don't mind his points prop in this one, if I'm being honest with you. His assists are at 2.5. He's been hitting that quite well. 7 out of his last 10 games. Gone under in his last 2, though, against the Chicago Bulls. And his rebound prop is 5.5. He's covered that in 6 of his last 10. Went under in his last 2 against the Bulls. So Kuminga points might be something that I'd consider. A quick look at Draymond. His points prop, 6.5. It's pretty much bang on. He's scoring 6 or 7 points in his last 5 games. The matchup with the Bulls, somewhat difficult, but Draymond covered this in his last 2 games against the Bulls. His assist prop is 4.5. He's covered that in both games against the Bulls. In his last 10, he's covered in 6 of his last 10 games. And his rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered that in 7 of his last 10, 1 of his last 2 against Chicago. So, yeah, in this game, quite a few plays that I like. Pods, DeMar, Kobe White, followed by Kuminga would probably be the order that I'm feeling aroused by. But that could obviously change after I've done my research. Into the very last game, it's the San Antonio Spurs versus Sacramento Kings. I'm looking at game time decisions here. Not many at all, but Victor Wembanyama is out of this game. So when we go through these Spurs players, we'll just look at their performance without Victor because he's changes everything with or without him. So let's check that out. So Sohan, his points prop is 14.5. I'm going to have a look at everything without Victor. So Sohan's covered this points line in 3 of 10 games without Victor Wembanyama. Does have a good matchup here against the Kings, but he's covered in 1 of his last 3 without Wembanyama against the Kings. His rebound prop, he's covered in 5 of his last 10. He has covered in 3 straight, but with Victor out of the lineup, we can see that he's covered in 5 out of his last 10. So that's not looking too good. Devin Vassell might be someone worth betting on, though. Definitely their number 1 option on offense. He's got a good matchup here against the Kings. 4 of his last 10, and he scored 29 and 32 points the last 2 games against the Kings. If we take Victor Wembanyama out of the lineup, we can see that he hasn't played that well without him. 8 consecutive games, he's gone under 24.5 points without Victor Wembanyama. Last game against the Kings without Victor, he did score 29 points, but his recent form with no Victor Wembanyama is cause for concern, so I don't like that. His assist prop is he's hit in 7 out of his last 10 games, and without Victor, so he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. So, yeah, not really screaming out to me there. 3-pointers, 2.5's the line. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. Does have a good matchup. Has covered both times against the Kings. What's his 3-point shooting like without Victor? Covered in 5 out of his last 10 games. So, yeah, nothing amazing there. Have a look at Trey Jones. Not his points, just his assist prop. The line is 6.5. Good matchup here against the Kings. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. Covered in 3 or 5 games against the Kings. Covered in his last 2. Take Victor Wembanyama out. He's covered in 2 or 4 against the Kings. Last 10 games without Victor. 4 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 6 consecutive games. So that's quite interesting. Maybe the team's gotten used to having Victor there, and then when he's not there, they're absolutely rattled. Not sure what to do. De'Aaron Fox had a monster game against the Lakers today. Checking his lines out. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. Well, 5 out of his last 10 once you include the Lakers game. In head-to-head matchups, he's destroyed the Spurs, covering in 5 out of his last 6. He's obviously got an excellent matchup here, but the line in this game is 10.5 to the Sacramento Kings. His assist prop, 5.5, covering in 8 of his last 10. Has a good matchup, but he did go under against the Lakers today, and I definitely know that because I had a bet on it. But he's covered this in 4 of his last 6. So for De'Aaron Fox, you might want to play points plus assists. It's at 33.5. He's got a great matchup for both. Covering in 4 of 6 games against the Spurs, but on a back-to-back, I'm not sure if I'd feel comfortable playing De'Aaron Fox, to be honest. I might be a little bit hurt after today's performance where he refused to pass the ball, but Domantas Sabonis could have a big game here against the Spurs. Like, the Spurs are very weak at the center spot, but Victor's not there, and a lot of guys are getting, really lifting for that matchup. But Sabonis is covered in 4 of his last 10. He's covered in 4 consecutive games against the San Antonio Spurs. And looking at his rebound prop, the line here is at 14.5. He's gone under in 5 out of 6 games against the Spurs, but he's covered his rebound line in 5 of his last 10. Looking at his assists, the line's at 8.5. The matchup is a difficult one. 6 out of his last 10 and only 1 of his last 6 against the Spurs. So, yeah, to be honest, I'm not really loving anything within this game. I think where the value could be is once all the players are available. The Spurs are going to obviously dive deeper into their bench. Kings on a back-to-back. We could see more minutes from some of their bench players, perhaps, especially if there's a blowout. So there could be some value there. But look, we got through all the props quite quickly today. I don't know if I was a little bit amped for this, or maybe I'm rushing because there's something else I want to watch. I can't really say, but we got through it quite quickly. Let me know if that was too quick. Did it appear like I was rushing? Did I not take my time? I don't know. Maybe I'm in a state of flow, baby, and I'm just seeing things as they happen. But doing today's my bets based on vibe, really. I don't want to overanalyze the numbers because not only did it waste a lot of, not waste, I did burn a lot of time doing that on my last set of picks, but it also didn't work out, and I was frustrated throughout the day. So I'm not going to overanalyze. I'll obviously do a bit more research. If you're interested in knowing the thing that I look at before I place a pick, I've got my NBA player prop sheet. What the hell was that? NBA player prop sheet. And that's an Excel spreadsheet with, I think, 13 different factors. And these are the different factors I take into consideration before I place a bet. So at least you know how thorough I can get with it. That's completely free. All you have to do is punch your email in, and then it downloads a document. It gets sent to you, sorry. So check that out. It's in the video description. And also, there's a link to Outlier there as well. 7-day free trial. I'll leave it up to you whether you decide to use it or not. But look, I appreciate you all for watching. Subscribers are growing quickly. Next milestone is 5,000. My prediction is that we can hit that by the end of March. So if you haven't already, sub to the channel because your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. Oh, man. Still got it. But look, if you do want to see more of my content, just click on the video up here. Get amongst it. Like, share, support the channel. You guys have been doing great. Also, shit, I almost forgot this. How could I forget this? This absolutely made my day. So I want to give a special shout out to somebody who, a very special somebody. Obviously, I get a lot of comments, but I want to give a special shout out to Dear Archer 81. I hope I said that wrong. I hope I said that right. I probably said it wrong. Gave me a $50 thanks in the comments from the last video. Now, you guys know that I would never, ever ask you for money or donations or anything like that. I do these videos purely because I enjoy it. I like the process. I like creating content. I like it when I'm right, but I also hate it when I'm wrong. And I like that this is helping a lot of you guys. So I just wanted to let you guys know I'm not expecting anyone to do something like this, but I just want to give a special shout out for that because it's a really lovely gesture. There's not many people alive who are willing to, give money to someone they don't even know. I do appreciate it. It does mean a lot. I encourage you guys to keep sharing your picks, your bets in the comment section. Hopefully we can all eat help each other out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.